without inflation and to keep America strong. Our society is a society of unlimited opportunity, which will reach out to every American and includes lifting the weak and nurturing the less fortunate. We've fought many years for our principles. Now we'll work to keep those principles in practice. That's what we have to leave to our children and to their children, and they are what this campaign was all about. We've come together again, we're united again, and now let's start building together and keep that prairie fire alive, and let's never stop shaping that society which lets each person's dreams unfold into a life of unending hope. America's best days lie ahead. And you know, you forgive me, I'm gonna do it just one more time. You ain't seen nothing yet. God bless you. Thank you all very much.
Ronald Reagan, live from the Century Plaza Hotel in Los Angeles, with Mrs. Reagan on his arm. Mrs. Reagan, who had a balance problem a day or two ago, was assured by the White House something quite natural and nothing to be concerned about. Ronald Reagan saying, and I quote him, "You ain't seen nothing yet." The first California resident to be elected president. When Richard Nixon was first elected in 1968, he was a resident of New York. He's the first native son of Illinois to be elected. Abraham Lincoln, you recall, was born in Kentucky. At age 69, Ronald Reagan was the oldest man to be elected to his first term. He's now 73, the oldest man ever to serve as President of the United States. First former union president to be elected. You recall he was president of the Screen Actors Guild when he was a Democrat. First former actor to be president, first divorced man to serve as president of these United States, first former governor of California. And what a job he has done in winning and fashioning this tremendous election victory. Whether it'll be a 50-state sweep or not, we'll take a look at it after we pause for these messages. We'll continue with more CBS News Election Night coverage in a moment.
Back here at Channel 4 election headquarters, let's look at the latest returns we have on the presidential race. Fritz Mondale enjoying, well, my heavens, it's certainly a strange thing to see. 54% of the vote, Ronald Reagan 45% of the vote, and that's with 47% of the precincts reporting.
And I wonder, after listening to the president, if we go down to the merry mirth makers on the other end of the building, what Ron Hanberg and Dave Nimmer might have to say about his acceptance speech.
Well, Skip, I think before that, it's interesting to me that CBS is the one network which has not yet declared Minnesota for Mondale. I'm also told it's the only state where they've had some computer problems, David. But it seems to me that it shouldn't, I guess, be considered that unusual if Minnesota does end up being the only state for Mondale. What do you think the factor is, David, beyond the native son aspect of that?
Well, I think there was a real belief in this state in the kind of social conscience that Walter Mondale was preaching, that there is some hope in this state that we can solve social problems, and that kind of coalition building that's been prevalent in the DFL party over the years.
For a long time.
Just looking at President Reagan, I had two thoughts that came across my mind, and one is that the man looks younger than he did 4 years ago, and I'm the one with the arthritic shoulder who can't comb my hair, for heaven's sakes. And the other one is I expected him to say, "Pilgrim, follow me."
Right. It sounded a lot like one of his campaign speeches, which I found a little bit unusual on a victory statement. One thing, we were told that the voting was very heavy even as the polls were closing in both Hennepin and Ramsey County, which can lead to a couple of ideas. One, that Minnesotans, upon hearing that this landslide was underway, decided at the last minute that they would go out and try to preserve at least Mondale's home state for Mr. Mondale. The other being that they all turned out because they wanted to be part of this landslide. Any Any speculation on your part?
Well, the only speculation is it didn't work in the rest of the country. And what I'm beginning to wonder, Ron, is whether that kind of support for the president, the overwhelming support for the president, translates to support for the Republican Party in 1988. And I guess from this perch in front of the old turkey hearts, I'm not so sure that Bush or Kemp or Baker are going to find that this kind of landslide support is there in 1988. Because you look at some polls and the majority of people support the nuclear freeze, and a lot of people...
Many of the Mondale issues, that's right. I think most of the people we've talked to, who are hopefully better informed than we are, say that it really doesn't translate to that 88 is going to be an entirely different problem, that so much has been based upon the Reagan personality, that 88 will be an entirely different case for the Republicans. Back to you guys.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Is it true that the rich voted for President Reagan and Rudy Boschwitz, and the poor voted for Walter Mondale and Joan Grow? Alan Cox has been checking our North Star election profile to check the presidential and the Senate race in terms of income. Alan?
I don't know if we can say rich and poor, but we can say there is a split of that sort, Dave, at least in the North Star election profile results we have so far. These are precincts of high income and precincts of low income in Minnesota, and you can see there's a pretty strong split here. President Reagan leading among high income precincts, former Vice President Mondale leading 2-to-1 among low income precincts. By the way, we're defining low income precincts as average family income of $15,000 or less. In the Senate race, we see the same type of division, but in this case, Rudy Boschwitz, of course, performing much better than President Reagan in Minnesota, and the differences are somewhat more pronounced. There's another factor that we're looking at, and I don't know that we can put numbers on it right now, but it's a measure of fiscal conservatism and social conservatism. You remember, Skip, 3 months ago when you and I were in Dallas, along with the rest of the crew, we were talking about the Republican Party in 1988, as the gentleman down the hallway we were talking about a few moments ago, and whether the social conservatives would take the fore in 1988 or the fiscal ones. Some of the figures we have out of Minnesota seem to suggest that Ronald Reagan benefited more this time around in Minnesota from the fiscal conservatives than he did from the social conservatives. At least he brought out more people in the precincts that tend to vote against bond issues, the ones where fiscal conservatism is important, which is not to say he didn't get plenty of a pro-life vote, a moral fiscal conservative fundamentalism religion. We should have some more numbers on that later, but it's an early indication of what kind of conservatism may go best in Minnesota.
That also seems to correlate fairly well, it seems to me, with what has happened nationwide. Hispanics in the West, for example, went 2-to-1 for Mondale. They tend to be the low-income people. Blacks in the South, almost, 88% for Mondale in many of the southern states. Reagan only picked up 8. Again, the lower end of the socioeconomic scale. Thank you, Ellen. We'll have more of Election Night 84 in a minute.
Where I work, things are pretty hectic, so I rely on my radio to get me through. With all the noise and clutter, I need a station with a quiet, relaxing mood. So I listen to Whale, W-A-Y-L, at FM 94. No other station has less chatter and more soothing music than Whale. They call Whale the place to relax, and I agree. Maybe you could improve the mood where you work by turning to FM 94, W-A-Y-L, the place to relax.
Let's go to Hickory Farms, where there's always something new.
Make a gift purchase of $20 or more through November 22nd and receive this decorative glass tree filled with strawberry bonbons of $4.99 value, free. And in that same holiday spirit, we'll also give a gift of food to a popular Yuletide charity, all from Hickory Farms, just for shopping early.
Come in and try before you buy. America loves Hickory Farms, where there's always something new.
WCCO Television, Minneapolis, St. Paul.
There really were only 2 congressional races this evening that were up for grabs, and one of those has been decided, and the incumbent will remain in office. Tim Penny defeated Keith Spicer in the southeastern part of the state by about a 14 percentage point margin. That's with 39% in, but it appears that Penny will walk away the winner there. The other race, much too close to call yet, in the 6th district. Still, just a small number of votes in. Jerry Sikorsky with a 20 percentage point lead over Pat Truman. That one's still much too close to call, David. Could go either way.
Simply because of the 13% of the precincts reporting Let's get to Congressman Sikorsky's reaction to that 60-40 margin. Colleen Needles is with him and is at home in Coon Rapids. Colleen?
Hello, Dave. This is a very upbeat crowd here tonight. The trend has definitely been in Sikorsky's favor. They have the figures here with about 15.5% of the precincts in. Sikorsky has a 62% lead over Truman. With me now is Susan and Jerry Sikorsky. Are you ready to call this race?
I won't call for some time. We wait till we get most of the precincts in, but we feel very good. We feel honored by this kind of turnout, this kind of support after 2 years of hard work.
You are running well ahead in most of the precincts of what you did 2 years ago. Does this surprise you, or did you expect this?
Well, we're running ahead in every precinct beyond what we did 2 years ago that I'm aware of, and it feels very good. We've been polling, we've been surveying, everyone's been calling it close, but I've been to more Cub food stores and Kmart's and bowling alleys than anyone else, and people respond to the hard work and the acid rain issues, equality, drunk driving, and the issue of fair taxes, and it's been fun.
You've received a lot of national recognition for your legislation to curb acid rain. Do you think, and you've had strong backing among environmental groups, do you think that has something to do with your strong lead tonight?
We're very concerned in Minnesota about hunting and fishing and our environment and our economy that's linked to our environment. And I know from first-hand experience, shaking hands with people is a big issue. And we know it from our polling as well.
One more question for you. This has been a very expensive campaign, the most expensive in Minnesota history, $1.1 million between you and your opponent. Is this setting a trend for escalating campaign costs?
I hope not. I think it's too expensive. I think it's we were outspent maybe by $100,000, and that kind of race isn't the kind of thing we need. I'm supporting reforms the Common Cause and others have proposed.
Alrighty, well, the trend definitely looks in your favor tonight. Good luck to you, and we'll keep a close eye.
Jerry Sikorsky did not have easy going in the early evening of the return.
No, not at all. And the House Democratic leadership, Tip O'Neill and company in Washington, has definitely been grooming Sikorsky for a leadership role in following years. The assumption, I think, being made, and it may turn out to be true, but it appeared to be somewhat erroneous for a while, that he was in a safe district, that he indeed would be there for a long period of time. He's freshman Democratic whip in the House and is pretty well thought of there. Obviously, this has turned out to be a much tougher race than they might have originally thought.
I can't believe that the voting must have been awfully heavy. Only 13%, 87% of the precincts are yet to be heard from. Is that margin likely to change?
Who knows? I mean, my guess is it will tighten up somewhat, David, but I honestly don't know, and our election profile hasn't been able to predict that one yet either. Pat Truman is with Andy Greenspan now in Brooklyn Park. At least we think they are. They are not yet together, so we will not go to that. In the meantime, we do have some state legislative races that we can give you. If we want to go out to the Richfield area right now, where Jim Swanson, the longtime DFL incumbent, 75% of the precincts there, and Jim Swanson may be out of work very shortly. Chris Chernholm, the IR challenger, appears to be unseating him now. 25% of the precincts left to report there. Phil Rivness, the DFL incumbent in 40B in Bloomington, is winning in his district. And if we go on to the next district on our slate, which should be 44B, Gloria Siegel, the DFL incumbent. Again, looks like a winner at this point anyway. In 47B, Bob Ellingson, another longtime DFL incumbent, has 56% of the vote. He looks like he's on his way to another term. Down to 57B, 95% of the precincts in on this one. Randy Statton will be back. He has been re-elected by a whopping margin. 58A, again, 91% of the precincts in. John Sarna. John Sarna has been in the legislature for a long, long time. He has won. 59A, Minneapolis, Dee Long will be back again for another year. We have declared her a victor. 100% of the precincts there reporting. And at 59B, again, 100%, Todd Otis, the DFL incumbent, has been reelected. We now do have that interview with Andy Greenspan and Pat Truman in Brooklyn Park. Let's go to Andy.
The mood is still quite buoyant here at Truman headquarters. You just heard your opponent sounding quite confident. What do you say to Mr. Sikorsky?
Well, we had a hard-fought race, and I'm just confident with the volunteer work that we did in precincts all over the district, and it was tremendous volunteer work and tremendous staff, that it may be early morning, but we're going to win.
You're down right now. down right now, 60 to 40. 60 to 40. How are you going to make up a 60 to 40 point difference? That's a sizable difference, even though only 13% of the vote is in.
Keep in mind, we've got Wright County, my home county, we've got Hennepin County, and Sherburne County left to report, and Washington County, which we expect to do, we expect to hold our own out there because we've had tremendous volunteers. Some of them are right here with us tonight.
If there's any state where there could be such a thing, if there's any state where there could be such a thing as a Fritz Mondale coattail effect, it might be here. He appears to be winning in Minnesota. How is that going to affect your race? Is that going to help Jerry Sikorsky?
Well, we never counted on Reagan coattails in Mondale's home state. We counted on hard work and a tremendous volunteer and staff organization, and in the end, that's what will pull it out. But you'll have to wait till early morning to see a victory. But it's victory.
Thank you. So you just heard from Pat Truman, down by 20 points, but still sounding confident that he can come from behind and win. Skip and Dave?
Well, there are still a lot of returns out on that one, and the way that one's going, David, it looks like it could be 3 o'clock in the morning before we know anything for sure. We have another group of legislative winners for you. Karen Clark, the 39-year-old DFL state representative, has won re-election in her district. 88% of the precincts have reported in thus far. Janet Clark's old district in South Minneapolis. Peter McLaughlin, the DFLer, has won election there over John O'Neill, the 62-year-old realtor, the independent Republican challenger. Lee Greenfield in another southeastern Minneapolis district. 43-year-old Greenfield will be back for another term. Wes Skoglund faces exactly the same fate. He'll spend another couple of years in the Minnesota House of Representatives. Skoglund won easily tonight. And John Brandel also picked up a win in 62B in South Minneapolis. And in 62A, Ken Nelson, DFL incumbent, also winning re-election. David?
We have two winners, two DFL women in the Minnesota House from Ramsey County. This would be in... let's see, in 63B, I'm sorry, 76% of the precincts in Ann Minia, the DFL incumbent has defeated Kurt Lilleboe. And in 64A, 90% of the precincts in Kathleen Vellinga has defeated Med Lafond, 76% to 24%. Pat Kessler is with us again to bring us up to date on some of the more vulnerable races. Pat?
Well, as we have throughout the evening, we've been looking at target races. The IRs have targeted races around the state, so have the DFL. Races they think they can win. Let's go directly to District 40A. We saw it a moment ago. Jim Swanson, longtime DFLer, has losing to Chris Chernholm, 53 to 47%. In District 64B, Richard Cohen looks like he is going to be a winner. He is the winner, 56%, over Mike Kasinkas, the Republican challenger, who had 44%. In District 11A, Ken Nelson, another seat targeted by Republicans. District 11A, we have Gary Findley, Gary Findley losing. He is a Republican incumbent, losing 65% to 35%. That was a target race. In District 62A, here we have Ken Nelson. Ken Nelson, the longtime DFL incumbent, has beaten off a challenge, 59 to 41%. And we have District 37A in Apple Valley. This is a seat targeted by the Republicans. Looks like we have no results on that right now. Carolyn Rodriguez is challenged by Eileen Tompkins, a Republican homemaker. And in District 13, these are unofficial figures. We've been watching these throughout the night, 50% to 50%. Paul Teedy, the Republican incumbent, and Tom Isle, who is the Democratic challenger. Ken McDonald in District 35B near Watertown, also 50%. He is tied with his Democratic challenger. Ken McDonald, KJ as he's known around the legislature, is tied 50% to 50%. A very, very tough race. DFLers have targeted that one as well. And in District 30A in Owatonna, it looks like Tom Shea, the DFLer, who is a wood tick, one of the original wood ticks, may be going down to defeat to Tom Hartle, the Republican challenger. Out there, it's 57% to 43%. Those are unofficial figures. So, gentlemen, it looks like there are mixed results. We spoke with people in the Republican caucuses and the Democratic caucuses at the Minnesota House earlier this evening, just a few minutes ago, actually, and neither side is willing to claim victory. Both sides are very, very cautious. They say a lot of these returns will be coming in much later tonight.
Appears to be a standoff at this point.
Well, it seems to be, but I'm wondering, you spent half your life there the last couple of years.
Seems like it anyway.
It's probably more truth than fiction. Do you have any sense at this point, with some of these races going the way they are, whether the balance of power is really going to swing very much at all?
Well, if I had to guess at this point, and these are only partial returns, I would guess that it's not going to swing much, if at all. However, as I said, the Republicans are saying we have very, very strong voter turnout in southern Minnesota. They say that won't come in until very late this evening. But what's interesting to me is that none of the people in the Republican caucus nor in the Democratic caucus are willing to claim victory. Now, they have been going around thumping tubs for the last 2 months saying that we're going to win control. As of, midnight now, they're saying we don't know yet.
If there's not a significant change, one way or the other, wouldn't you have to consider that an IR loss? I mean, they've been the ones talking about the fact that they might be able to win it.
I would say just the other way. If there wasn't a significant change, I would say it would be considered a DFL win. That's exactly the way I'd say it, because the DFL has control after all. It's very difficult to unseat a ruling party.
Okay, thank you. More of Election 84 in a minute.
Gentlemen, here are 3 magic words that can offer you super savings on clothing. 3 words: Clothing Distribution Center, CDC, where you'll select from thousands of famous brand first quality suits, sport coats, overcoats, and slacks. Look at the display, then look at the price tags. Wool blend vested suits, $99.90. Fashion Park, Sussex, Worsted Tex, Hardy Amy, and other famous brand pure wool suits, $149.90 to $199.90. All wool blazers, $79.90, and they can fit most any man, including athletes. For top quality clothes at rock bottom prices, shop the Minneapolis Miracle, CDC.
We've got it, Twin Cities. 20 years of rock and roll in stereo on KJO 104 FM. We play the great ones.
For face-to-face counseling after other services have already closed, call Neon. Mobile crisis teams can provide counseling and assistance during the nighttime hours. Neon is a service of YES 339-0895.
WCCO Television, Minneapolis, St. Paul.
Checking the latest returns on the presidential race in Minnesota. The percentages have changed, well, not appreciably at all, in fact, since we last left. Now, we've broken over the 50% margin, 53% of the precincts reporting Fritz Mondale, 53% of the vote to President Reagan's 46%.
Our Alan Cox is back with us to take a look at the pile of computer printouts that you have from our North Star election.
A pile of computer printouts are making me increasingly more nervous because our profile is showing a tighter race in the presidential race. We are getting some of those southwestern Minnesota precincts. Right now, our profile is showing a lead of something like 30,000 votes expected when all the votes are counted for former Vice President Mondale, a 2 percentage point margin. And I'm told that's fairly close to what the CBS News projections are showing right now, although CBS still declines to call this race. They're still waiting for more precincts also. Looking at our figures for the Senate race, not as much change there. We show a margin of about roughly 300,000 votes, 310,000 votes, and a margin of 15 percentage points, and that's roughly what we've seen for the last few times. Let's look at one more breakdown now on these 2 races. A breakdown according to age, precincts in which there's a concentration of young voters, precincts in which there's a concentration of elderly. And you can see the division there in the presidential race, President Reagan leading among the young by 10 percentage points, former Vice President Mondale leading by, 8 percentage points, 7 percentage points among the elderly. In the Senate race, we see somewhat similar numbers, an even larger lead for Senator Boschwitz among the young, and also a lead for the senator among the elderly. One more point from the CBS News exit polls. We don't have the hard figures, but we're being told CBS did polls in 17 states today, exit polls of people as they left the voting booths. And we're being told by the computer analysts in New York that the gender gap is showing up much more strongly in Minnesota than in any of those other 17 states. So we're going to be looking for more numbers on that, more explanation.
You mentioned you were nervous when you started this whole thing. All 3 networks have made a declaration at this point. Our North Star election profile has in essence done that.
Yeah.
That's why you're nervous, because it's getting really tight?
30,000 vote margin, that makes me nervous. I'm not going to question the networks.
That's large enough for a case of nerves, 30%.
I guess you only need 1 to win.
You're right.
About a half an hour ago, when President Reagan made his informal acceptance speech in California, the first among the many people he thanked was his Vice President George Bush. We understand now we have Vice President Bush's response.
And to those who supported our opponents, let me say that we recognize the outcome of this election as a mandate to represent not just those who supported the Reagan-Bush ticket, but to represent all Americans. For in this hour of victory, this wonderful hour of victory, let's not forget that the strength of our free system lies not only in the right of the majority to express its will, but in the right of all Americans to have their voices heard and their interests served. And this has been a long, hard-fought campaign, a historic campaign. And a little while ago, I had a most gracious phone call from Geraldine Ferraro. She campaigned hard. She was a strong opponent. No, she worked very, very hard. A strong opponent. Barbara and I both talked to her and thanked her and sent our best wishes to her and to her family. And now, in the great American tradition, after every election, let's come together as one people, united and indivisible, to share a common purpose, to realize the dream held by all Americans, regardless of party, the universal goal of peace and prosperity and opportunity for all. Thank you all, and God bless you. Thank you for this fantastic support. Thank you very much.
Vice President George Bush, his acceptance speech from Texas. In just a few moments now, we will rejoin CBS programming, which is already in progress, to New York, and Dan Rather at CBS News election headquarters.
Words here. I think back to something Governor Celeste of Ohio, who was running the Mondale campaign here, said a while back when talking about the campaign. He said he was optimistic, but you can't swim totally against the national tide. Well, the Democrats could not do that in the Midwest. Ronald Reagan took it. He took it easily. Bernard Goldberg is in the South.
Thanks, Meredith. A lot of Southern Democrats are breathing easy tonight, not because Walter Mondale got trounced, but because they didn't. What we saw in the South is a very popular president shutting out the opposition, but that popularity did not extend to fellow Republicans. There is no new Republican South because there were no coattails to speak of. As for the future of the National Democratic Party, the feeling in the South is that the old liberalism isn't going to make it anymore, that it's simply a prescription for defeat. And one race we didn't get around to earlier, Tommy Burnett won re-election to the state Senate in Tennessee. He did it without campaigning much. In fact, he didn't campaign at all. That's because Tommy Burnett is in federal prison on federal tax charges. And now let's go up north to Bob Simon in Boston.
From what Bernard is saying, it sounds like the Civil War is finally over, Dan, that there seems to be, in fact, very little between the South and the North, and in one very important respect. When Walter Mondale said a short while ago that in every defeat can be found the seeds of victory, you can begin to see those new seeds already, and I see them in the East. You can begin to see the shape of the new Democratic Party, which is arising from the ashes of Walter Mondale's Democratic Party. Look, first of all, at 4 Democratic candidates from the Senate, who won in the East today. Bradley in New Jersey, Biden in Delaware, Rockefeller in West Virginia, and Kerry in Massachusetts. These are, first of all, no Mondales. They are young, they are hungry, they are lean, they are mean, they are unsentimental. They are very well groomed, in the words of one old Boston pal. They're a little bit too well groomed. They are, above all, children of television. Have a look at John Kerry.
To quote one of our great philosophers, Jackie Gleason, how sweet it is!
Dan, these candidates are above all post-New Deal. They're not associated with unions or dying industry or big government or special interests or any of the stigmas which Walter Mondale just couldn't shake off. What's interesting is how everything about these candidates exudes the high tech that the East, as other parts of the nation, is moving to. They are entrepreneurs. They believe in independence, in individualism, in risk-taking. The sky is the limit, and there are no soft landings. They're different from the Democrats, and they don't believe from the old Democrats, in that they don't believe in big government. They're different from the Republicans, in that they don't want the government getting involved in any social issues. Dan, if the Martians were to land tomorrow and go to the Democratic Party and say, "Take me to your leader," I have no idea who they'd be taken to, but I think they'd begin walking east.
Thank you, Bob Simon, and our other correspondents in our regional CBS News election headquarters. Hawaii goes to Ronald Reagan. 4 electoral votes from the Aloha State, and for the second time in Hawaii's history at least, it went for Richard Nixon in 1972. It goes for Ronald Reagan this time. Our CBS News estimate is that when all the votes are in and counted, Ronald Reagan's margin in Hawaii will be on the order of 54% to 46%. Now look at the map. The only thing standing between Ronald Reagan and an absolute historic 50-state sweep is the state of Minnesota. You can see on the map Ronald Reagan has 525 electoral votes. That's the most electoral votes of any president in history. FDR got 523 once. Richard Nixon got 520. Ronald Reagan has 525 electoral votes. Walter Mondale has only that little blinking dot at the District of Columbia, 3 electoral votes. It boils down to Minnesota. If Walter Mondale winds up carrying Minnesota, at last look he was leading in Minnesota, then it means that this election will go down much as the 1972 election when George McGovern carried only Massachusetts and the District of Columbia. A 50-state sweep for Ronald Reagan is up to Minnesota. Our CBS News coverage of this historic election night continues after these messages.
We're Manufacturers Hanover, helping you grow wherever you are.
A silk importer departs from Los Angeles.
Backed by a letter of credit from our bank's international division.
A furniture manufacturer expands his inventory in Cleveland.
With our commercial corporation behind him.
The World Financial Center springs up in New York.
That's our bank's real estate division. They can handle almost anything.
We're Manufacturers Hanover.
And now you know why we're called the financial source worldwide.
At AT&T, we know you never think about our torture tests.
Yeah, but, it's just a phone.
Or about our extraordinary quality control.
I hear you fine, Mom. Australia's only halfway around the world.
Or even about how reliably we design things.
It still works. Who ever heard of a computer that works without air conditioning?
You can take everything we do for granted. Because at AT&T, we leave nothing to chance.
It's not a total loss. The phone still works.
AT&T, we're reaching out in new directions.
Nobody sweats the details like GM.
MasterCard, I need to do nothing.
MasterCard International.
Absolutely nothing.
So worldly, so welcome,
MasterCard. When it comes to nothing, you're really something.
International.
Let's take a look at the National Vote Board back at our CBS News election headquarters in New York. Now, these are actual votes in and tabulated. 71% of the precincts from around the nation are reporting now. Ronald Reagan's percentage lead over Walter Mondale, 59% to 41%. Remember that the all-time high in terms of the percentage for any president, Lyndon Johnson in 1964 with 61+%. Ronald Reagan has 38.5 million votes to Walter Mondale's 26.5 million plus votes. That's the way the national vote stands at the moment. And Leslie Stahl, our last CBS News estimate of the 435 seats in the House of Representatives, we figured the Republicans pick up, what, 15 or 16?
15.
15.
We're now at 15. It'll fluctuate 1 or 2 seats, but right now it's 15.
Not to be considered a working or ideological majority for the president,
No, in fact, we've taken a look at the new makeup of the House, and CBS is assuming that the ideological makeup will be almost identical to the one that it was in this current Congress. Almost identical.
Well, with 435 Congressmen, one thing that always strikes me as a reporter, you have 435 people who love politics, love love this country, love to talk. A lot of well-known names in the House. Let's go over the winners and losers among them.
Let's. We have a lot of leaders who have won. Tip O'Neill, whom you interviewed before, was unopposed. He's won re-election. Jim Wright, the majority leader of the House from Texas, he was unopposed. He's won re-election. Bob Michael, the minority leader from Peoria, Illinois, has won easily. And so has Trent Lott, the minority whip from Mississippi. But we do have some leaders who are in trouble, and at least one who has lost. From the state of Maryland, Clarence Doc Long, the chairman of the Subcommittee on Foreign Aid, has lost his seat in Maryland. He was in the Congress for 11 terms. He has lost to a woman, Helen Bentley, a former journalist at the Baltimore Sun. This was her third run against him. Doc Long defeated. He was a thorn in the side of the Reagan administration, a big critic of President Reagan's Central America policy.
Excuse me, Leslie, Bentley loses that race in Maryland.
Doc Long loses the race.
Bentley wins.
Bentley wins.
Now, George Bush campaigned for Bentley in that race.
George Bush went into Maryland to campaign for, you know, the big issue was age. She tried to make Bentley's age, 75, only 2 years older than Ronald Reagan, a major issue. She said he seemed confused sometime, and that seemed to have tipped the scales against Doc Long. Another leader who is in trouble, the race is too close to call, is Jim Jones of Oklahoma, the chairman of the House Budget Committee. That race is at the moment, as we can see, according to the tabulated vote, with 80% of the precincts reported. We are showing Jones with 52%, but we still assume that it is too close to call. He is another person that the Reagan administration would dearly love to be defeated. He has been a point man on the Budget Committee against Ronald Reagan's economic programs.
Leslie, I don't mean to keep interrupting, but that comes as bulletin material, certainly a lightning flash, that Jones was widely considered to be virtually unbeatable in that race. For one thing, he got a lot of money from special interest groups to make that race, and if he were to lose that, that'd have to go down as the biggest upset in the House, wouldn't you think?
Well, this would be a major upset for the leadership, but Dan, this is a very Republican district around Tulsa, Oklahoma, a lot of oil men, and he has been representing this district since 1972 against a lot of odds. He did get a lot of money, raised $1 million from business PACs, but he's really fighting the tide in that district, and really it's not that much of a surprise in such a conservative part of the country that a man who has been the point man against Ronald Reagan on the budget would be in such trouble. It's not that much of a surprise, but he hasn't lost yet. We also have some other winners up in Massachusetts. Gary Studs has won re-election. You remember that he was censured by the House for having a homosexual affair with a congressional page. He has won that seat in Massachusetts with 58% of the vote. There he is, Gary Studs, winning despite his homosexual affair. In New York City, the most expensive House campaign in all of history, more than $2 million worth. This is the Silk Stocking District in Manhattan. Bill Green, the Republican, has won re-election with about 56% of the vote against Andy Stein. They each spent about $1 million. Bill Green winning re-election in New York. We also have one of only two new blacks who are running for election this time in the state of Mississippi losing. Robert Clark has lost his race against the Republican incumbent Webb Franklin. Webb Franklin is one of about 6 Southern Democrats who switched parties this time and ran as a Republican, and he won. Ronald Reagan coattails and the fact that so many white Democrats, voted for a Republican against a black candidate.
Leslie, it's still true, is it not, that there isn't a single congressman from the South, from anywhere in the states of the old Confederacy, who is black?
As of right now, that's true. If Robert Franklin had won, he would have been the first black representing Mississippi in the House since Reconstruction, and there isn't a black from the South as of right now. We can tell you a little bit more about the South in general. The 15 seats that the Republicans are picking up, a great many of them are in the South. We have 2 Republican pickups in Texas. Kent Hance, who ran for Senate, his seat has gone to a Republican. Jack Hightower, a Democratic independent, has lost to a Republican. And And we also have 5 very close races in North Carolina. We have a lot of close races that we're still watching in the House, Dan.
Well, we'll certainly continue to keep an eye on that Jim Jones race in Oklahoma, perhaps the biggest upset of the night in terms of a House race in the making. Our CBS News coverage of Election Night 1984 will continue after these messages.
We're into oil business. My son finds it and I sell it. Got a new pickup to help him do his job. Got an Epson personal computer to help me do mine. Now, I looked at the IBM PC, but my Epson runs more programs. And only Epson has this keyboard. See here? Keys in English, not computer ease. With one button, I can chart our production capacity.
Or calculate our depletion allowance.
I believe whatever it is you're looking for is out there in the ground, son.
Under this snow, there's more oil than in Saudi Arabia. 20 years ago, Sun Company developed a process to get oil from tar sands. Since then, a lot's developed around here. Jobs, a community, hockey teams. The energy's not just under the snow, it's everywhere, even on the ice. At Sun, we think that putting our energy back into a community is just as important as getting it out.
Where there's sun, there's energy.
Nowadays, it seems everybody's comparing himself to a banker. Savings and loan folks say they can give you financial counsel like bankers.
And we're just like a bank.
Stockbrokers say they can manage your transactions like bankers.
And we're just like a bank.
When others go so far to say they're like a banker, isn't it nice to know that the one helping you really is a banker? The only place you'll find a banker is the bank.
A message from America's full-service banks. Introducing technology is one thing. Making it easy to use is another. So at AT&T, we not only have people who know machines, but people who know people. A group of over 150 psychologists who test people's reactions to new products to find out what they're comfortable with and what they're not. You see, we believe even the most advanced technology is of little use if people are afraid of using it. AT&T, we're reaching out in new directions.
Getting ready to talk to CBS News correspondent Diane Sawyer. This is Dan Rather at CBS News election headquarters in New York. Now, welcome back to those of you who are joining us, those of you who are sticking right straight with us and scratching your head saying, what's going on in there? Suffice to say, we have some business to do with our affiliated stations. Some go, some come back, some say straight way through. That's what all that was about. Diane Sawyer. Ronald Reagan, a tremendous victory for him tonight. Whether you like him, don't like him, whether you agree with him or don't agree with him, a tremendous victory. He's right on the verge of possibly having a 50-state sweep. He strengthened his assault on the traditional Democratic strongholds while consolidating his support from groups that backed him strongly in 1980. Let's take another look at the interest groups and how they voted tonight, according to our CBS News New York Times poll.
All right, Dan, we've had a chance to hear some of the regional analyses, but we'll stand back now and give you what we promised you earlier, namely a snapshot of the national faces so you can put them in the campaign scrapbook. We'll take a look again at some of the faces we mentioned before, and we'll start now with the women voters. On a national basis, the gender gap is back. Women are still less likely to vote for Ronald Reagan than men, and it's about the same margin that it was 4 years ago. But Ronald Reagan did substantially better with women than he did 4 years ago. He has captured a majority of the female vote, so even though the gap is back, it's hard to see in his terms this time how it mattered. The union gap, well, it stayed about the same too. Ronald Reagan kept his hold on nearly half of the union voters, despite the fact that union leaders put everything on the line for Walter Mondale. And Ronald Reagan held his own with Catholic voters, despite Geraldine Ferraro. One area where there was no erosion for the Democrats, by the way, the Hispanic vote. It's a bit of a surprise given all of the effort the GOP put into registering Hispanic voters. The Hispanics appear to be resisting the blandishments of the GOP. And of course, black voters are even more solidly for Walter Mondale than they were for Jimmy Carter 4 years ago. Equally equally fervent on the Republican side, though, the conservative Christians who are supporting Ronald Reagan. And also supporting Ronald Reagan in a big way, as you've heard, the nation's youngest voters. The youngest voters, of course, went slightly for Jimmy Carter 4 years ago. And Dan, you and I earlier talked about the enthusiasm of white males for Ronald Reagan and the Republican ticket. Well, now the results are in, and here it is. Our poll says that white Protestant males nationally in this country went for Ronald Reagan 78%. Our computer wizard also punched up Italian-American women to see what the Ferraro factor would mean there, and we discovered that 54% of Italian-American women went for Ronald Reagan. And speaking of computers, a little-known but important and growing interest group in this country, people who use computers at home or at the office. They voted almost 2-to-1 for Ronald Reagan. So the hackers have spoken, whatever it means.
Diane, what would be your guess? That's all anyone can do. Given the fact that the Mondale Ferraro ticket lost so overwhelmingly, and that Geraldine Ferraro, for all of her effort, and she tried mightily, wasn't able to carry even women of Italian heritage in the country, will either party put a woman on the ticket next time? Chances stronger or less strong as a result of what happened today?
Everyone you talk to argues that in this case it's not a referendum on gender. In this case, it is a referendum on that ticket and on that woman. And so that the Republicans are still talking about their own women. They're still talking about women like Jean Kirkpatrick with the possibility of adding them to the ticket. I think it's all going to be in what the polls show. It's all going to be in where the women's registration stands. It's all going to be in the demographics by the time you get there in '88. I don't think that this election is conclusive on the issue of a woman on the ticket yet. And you can certainly look at it the other way. And every woman that you talk to in an official capacity on the Democratic side pulls you aside and says, one thing I want to make sure you know, you can't blame Geraldine Ferraro for what happened here.
We have only a few seconds left, but if you had to point to one thing more than any other, what hurt Geraldine Ferraro the most, other than the fact that she was running on second place on a ticket that didn't stand much of a chance?
Oh, I think probably coming out of the bat, the problem with her taxes, which everyone says immediately detracted from the enthusiasm that she could have brought to the ticket. And then again, you have to remember, it's the first time in a long time that you have had both members of the ticket from roughly the same region of the country, that is to say the north and the middle north part of this country. You don't have a vice presidential candidate from the south, and when all is told, that may be the defining factor.
Thank you, Diane Sawyer. Our CBS News coverage of Election Night 1984 continues in a moment.
Sunday begins the scintillating saga of Ellis Island, and Jillian is the sultry nightclub singer who would seduce her way to the top.
I'm gonna marry the girl. She's a killer.
Peter Riegert is the toast of Broadway, his future jeopardized by his own blind passion.
You immigrant pig!
Ellis Island, Sunday.
This is CBS.
The last time we bought a home, it was simple. How did it get so complicated?
These days, no one can make buying or selling a home a picnic. But Coldwell Banker Real Estate can make it as simple as humanly possible. That's what the Sears Financial Network is all about. Visit a Sears Financial Network center or any Coldwell Banker office. The Sears Financial Network. Trust us to make it work for you.
When a company gets bigger, it experiences growing pains. The pain of throwing out communications equipment that's suddenly obsolete. The pain of buying new equipment to replace it. Fortunately, there is Centron, the only communication system you'll ever need, because Centron service will grow as you grow, simply, inexpensively.
Hello, George.
Centron Communication System. Growth without the growing pains. Centron, from Northwestern Bell.
WCCO Television, Minneapolis, St. Paul.
The following program is brought to you in part by Centron from Northwestern Bell.
WCCO Television, in cooperation with Control Data Corporation, presents Election Night 84.
Minnesota remains the lone obstruction toward President Ronald Reagan's 50-state sweep. In his return to the White House, 57% of the precincts reporting Fritz Mondale clings to the lead that he maintained, established earlier in the evening, has maintained throughout the evening, 53% to the president's 46%.
David, when we last checked in with Alan Cox, our North Star election profile was showing that Fritz Mondale would wind up with only a 30,000 vote margin in Minnesota. There are some new figures on that, I understand, Alan.
Latest figures we have show another margin for Mondale of 60,000 votes. Probably when all the votes are counted, that would average out to about a 3 percentage point margin for Mondale in Minnesota. Breaking down the results of our North Star election profile and the CBS News exit poll that was taken today in Minnesota, we see the division between the candidates and the voting groups. Walter Mondale carrying women in Minnesota, Ronald Reagan carrying men. Walter Mondale carrying blue-collar workers and union members. Ronald Reagan carrying young people. Walter Mondale carrying the elderly. And in Minnesota, Mondale apparently carrying the strongly Catholic areas. That's a variation from elsewhere in the country. And the rural areas. President Reagan leading among some of the more pro-life areas and fundamentalist areas. According to the CBS News exit poll, there's a 50-50 tie between the two men among Minnesota farmers. And we can also say, by looking at the North Star election poll, that the president apparently carried the 1st congressional district in southeastern Minnesota, the 2nd in southwestern, the 3rd district, the southern suburbs, so to speak, at least in Hennepin County, and the 7th district, northwest Minnesota. Vice President Mondale carrying the 4th congressional district, which of course is largely St. Paul, the 5th district, which is Minneapolis, the 8th district, which is northeastern Minnesota. And we wish we had more results from the punch card tabulations up in Anoka County, but apparently right now Mondale is leading in the 6th congressional district, the northern suburbs.
You can see why that's still so close. Thank you, Alan. Let's go over to the Civic Center now, where Karen Burrows looks like she's almost all alone over at Mondale headquarters.
No, Skip, I see 2 photographers and Pat Miles here. I'm not alone yet. 22 months ago, Walter Mondale stood at the House chambers of the state capitol and said, "I am ready to be president." In Iowa, he got a big win. That was the first contest out, and then along came Gary Howard out of left field and Jesse Jackson, and it was a 4-month contest, Mondale claiming victory on June 5th. But then he appointed Geraldine Ferraro his running mate, and for a while there was a lot of excitement about the campaign. He went to San Francisco, he got the endorsement, but it was not to be. The high point of the campaign was probably following the first debate, and probably because the president seemed to falter during that debate. Tonight people came here prepared, I think, that to see Walter Mondale lose. Their spirits heightened somewhat when it appeared that Minnesota is going to go for Walter Mondale tonight, calling Minnesota a special state, a remarkable state, and a leader for the nation. They're sweeping up here, and I think we're about to wrap here, too. Back to you, Skip.
My heavens, it looks like a painting of still life.
It does indeed.
Doesn't it? Mike Walsher has been standing by at the Reagan Press headquarters on the Capitol approach in St. Paul. Mike?
Right, Dave, and it is near deserted here as well at Reagan headquarters in downtown St. Paul. We had quite an interesting scene, though, about an hour ago when President Reagan made his victory speech from out in California. About 20 folks, including Marcy Lear, the co-chair of the Reagan Minnesota campaign, stood around the television sets here and occasionally broke into shouts and applause and so on as they welcomed their man for his 4 more years in the White House. Marcy, did you expect it to be such a victory of this magnitude?
Yeah. I think the figures I wrote down today was 58.6 nationally. So I think I did expect that. I truly, though, expected carry Minnesota also.
Well, do you think it's still out on that? CBS is not projecting that. What do you think?
It depends upon where that 43% is. You know, I think the latest figures you showed me are 57%. Depends upon where that 43% is.
So the president, you believe, has at least a chance?
We haven't conceded yet. Right. Okay.
What were your emotions when you think back to your support for Ronald Reagan over the years, as you sat here and watched an hour ago this speech after such a big victory? What were you feeling?
I was feeling good. I really was. I'm disappointed about Minnesota. I'm disappointed that Minnesota, is so out of step with the rest of the country. But On the other hand, my gosh, look at the victory the man had. Obviously, the majority of the people in this country feel he deserves 4 more years. I do too.
Let me look forward to that. Do you expect to see, for example, more on the social program, the social agenda in these next 4 years?
You mean on the administration?
In the administration part.
No more so than what we've seen. His past 4 years have been very successful. I think he'll continue doing somewhat the same. A lot of people were wearing "Let Reagan be Reagan" buttons long before that first debate.
Okay.
And they were saying, let this man be a little more conservative. We may see a little more conservatives out there.
Okay, thank you very much. Marcy Lear, the co-chair of the Reagan in Minnesota campaign, rejoicing after a night of victory indeed. If not in Minnesota, then certainly in 49 other states. We'll wrap it up here, too. Mike Walter live from Reagan headquarters. Gentlemen.
Thank you, Mike. Senator Rudy Boschwitz will become a sophomore in January, another 6-year term in the United States Senate. The senator right now with 56% of the vote to Joan Groh's 43, 58% of the precincts in. Obviously, Groh has already conceded defeat, and Boschwitz has already claimed victory. There's one thing we should note. Apparently, there was a crossover in this particular vote. 94% of the Republicans in Minnesota who cast ballots voted for Boschwitz, and so did 21% of the Democrats. That is an interesting statistic.
58% of the precincts reporting that lead appears to be increasing. Rudy Boschwitz, the last we spoke with Rudy Boschwitz was through the good offices of Don Shelby. Senator Boschwitz at that time appeared to be so animated to me, I'm sure he went up and to lie down for a little bit to get over the exhaustion of the evening. Don?
Well, he took the rest of the night off completely. After you saw him, he went up to his rooms at the Leamington. We haven't seen him since. The music that we've been hearing in the background kind of belies the idea that the party's over here, but it is, in effect. But also, the party seems to be just beginning because this is the party of the victors tonight. And everybody seems to be quieting down, except for out by my partner Mike Strand by the bandstand, where there's still some people dancing. Over in one little corner here at the Leamington Hotel Hall Estates are a group of diehards, the people who are orchestrators, are participants in the entire takeover plan for the Minnesota State House Legislature. They're still at it, trying to get last-minute details, last-minute ballots. Some problems coming out of Stillwater where people were using felt-tip pens to use the punch-out cards, and they've impounded the ballots now, so they won't know whether they've taken over the House. But all of them seem to think that they're going right along there and taking it over. And we'll know by tomorrow, or perhaps even considering the Stillwater problem, it may have to be even later than that. But the independent Republicans here over the corner still working, saying that they believe the orchestrated move to take over the state legislature is working. Pat Kessler may have to disagree with that. But that's it from my perspective. We didn't find here the kind of divisiveness we thought we'd see with the fundamentalist right of the Republican Party. At least I didn't see it on the floor tonight. I'm wondering if you, Mike Strand, saw any of it from your vantage point.
Well, Don, if I may use a video pun, you sort of dance with the one who brought you to this particular stage in the election. Certainly, unity is easier when you're winning. But we did not see, of course, the ideological divisions which divided the party so deliberately last summer during the state convention. It seems the fundamentalists and moderates have put down the axe tonight to pick up where they had hoped to win this fall, to make inroads in the House of Representatives in particular in Minnesota. As you said, the results are coming in very slowly, and there's really no telling at this point what the makeup of the House will be as yet. But it was interesting to note that none of the moderates who had even been shunned by the fundamentalist groups in the state convention this summer were not bitter. There was no real animosity that we witnessed here tonight. It was simply a get-together for the victors, in that we had to see the euphoria and the swelled pride which we here in the Republican convention site. Back to you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Get some rest, gentlemen. You've been there a long time standing on your feet. So is Pat Miles over at the Civic Center in St. Paul, scene of Walter Mondale's concession speech and Joan Groh's. Pat, what are your thoughts?
Well, quite a contrast, of course, from the Leamington over here, Skip. Joan Groh was in early this evening, almost around 9:30, to give her concession speech. It was all over for her pretty quickly. She had said all along it was going to be a tough battle and a long road uphill, and she was correct about that. She suffered perhaps from the same thing that happened to Walter Mondale. She was running against a candidate who was just too popular. Joan Grow has 2 more years left now as her term as Secretary